Andrew Berry's had an interesting run here in Cleveland, and a lot of things have happened since 2020 with this football team. It's been some of the most interesting times to be a Browns fan for good and bad reasons, right? But that's what I want to talk about today is Andrew Berry's plan, what it had to be when he started here in 2020, and what did that plan evolve into, and how did those plans evolve? And basically answering the question of how the hell did we get here, right? Where the Browns are today, how did the Browns end up here? There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to get into. So before I get started, I do want to thank my sponsor, PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a fun way to earn cash while you watch your favorite teams. No complex betting rules, just pick more or less on a few player stats and lock in your lineup. Here are my picks for this upcoming season, AFC North edition. Jimmy Bernard, I have less than 475. This has to do with volume available in Pittsburgh's offense. Quincy Judkins, I have over 975. Browns improved line. I think the run game's going to be better with it. Chase Brown, under 900 yards. Joe Burrow equals less rushing yards usually for the Bengals offense. Mark Andrews, more than 475 yards. Lamar's going to need a safety blanket. Check to see if PrizePicks is available in your state. You could follow me on the app at Quinn_C to see all my lineups. Download the PrizePicks app today. Play $5 and get $50 in lineup to download the app using the link in the description. In 2020, when Andrew Berry takes this job, I think the plan is relatively simple, and it's actually a short-term plan. The Browns had a decent roster in 2020. They just did not have the right pieces of glue in the right places of this puzzle for it to hold. And that was Andrew Berry's job, right? Fix the Browns' offensive line, fix the Browns' offense, and see what you can get out of Baker Mayfield. And to Andrew Berry's credit, he did a great job in doing that in the short term. Jed Wills worked out in 2020 at least at left tackle. The signings that the Browns made were pretty good. Jack Conklin being the main one, but J.C. Treader at center, believing in the right guard competition and that birthing Wyatt Teller, was another good outcome for the Cleveland Browns. That was an Andrew Berry decision at the end of the day, because he could have just signed another guard and taken Wyatt Teller out that competition, but he believed in his valuation of him enough to put him in a spot to be successful, and he was successful. So that led to the Browns for the next 3 years having the 2 years having the best offensive line in all of football. Well, my bad, 3 years. Yeah, 2020, 2021, and 2022. The Browns had one of the best offensive lines in all of football. And it certainly paid off in 2020, where the Browns went 11-5. They almost went to the conference championship game. And it was like, that's probably the best we felt about the Cleveland Browns. Maybe 2023, some people felt even better, but that was a pretty high moment for Browns fans in this era, this expansion era for the Cleveland Browns. But we often talk about how failure can derail plans, because it's obvious. If you fail, you get fired. You can't have plans if you don't have a job, right? That is kind of obvious to us, and we talk about it all the time. But the other way that plans can get destroyed is not talked about enough, and that is with success. See, sometimes you can be successful early, and sometimes that works out. But other times, being successful early derails a lot of your future plans in a similar way that failure would have derailed your plans. It's hard to spot when it's happening, because if a team is ahead of schedule, people are usually excited about that, right? I mean, think about how people feel about the Spurs, how people felt about Oklahoma City last year, how people felt about the Texans that first year, how people felt about the Patriots, right? They're ahead of schedule. And oftentimes we think just because a team's ahead of schedule that everything's going to go smoothly for them after that. But if you ever follow up with those ahead of schedule teams, I mean, look, the Cavs were ahead of schedule in 2025, right? Where they were the best record in the NBA. Nobody expected them to be that good, that fast in Kenny Atkinson's first year. And that kind of messed them up a little bit, being ahead of schedule. Like in sports, it always feels good to be ahead of schedule. But being ahead of schedule does mean that you are derailing your original plan, which might not be a good thing in the long run. I'm not saying being ahead of schedule is bad, but there are ways that it can trip you up if you get too caught up in being ahead of schedule. And I think that's what happened with the Cleveland Browns, right? The same thing that we saw happen with the Houston Texans, where the Houston Texans got good quickly and then immediately threw out all of their plans for the future to try to maximize getting better right now because they thought they were close to a championship. And that resulted in them making a bunch of moves that locked their roster in a position where they kind of screwed themselves. Same thing with the Cavs, right? The Cavs won that 60-game season. We felt great about it, championship contenders. So that locked us into making some moves that locked the roster up, that jammed the roster up, signing some extensions that jammed the roster up over time. And now you're looking at the Cavs roster and you're like, this is a bit of a mess. But this is how you end up here, right? Sometimes being ahead of schedule can force you to do things quicker that put you in a bad situation. It's okay to be ahead of schedule, but you still got to be patient when you're ahead of schedule. You can't rush. And I think that's the lesson that the Browns should have learned in 2020. They were definitely ahead of schedule in 2020, 11-5. Nobody thought that was going to be the case with the 2020 Cleveland Browns, with a new head coach, a new general manager, a new offensive line. But that was the case. But the Browns weren't really patient after 2020. Everything that happened in 2020 fast-tracked everything else that happens after 2020. It sped up everything. Every decision that the Cleveland Browns ended up making was made faster and more harsher because of the success in 2020, because it convinced the Cleveland Browns that they were maybe closer to a championship than in reality they actually were. Right? If you actually look at that 2020 season, there were a lot of fortunate things that happened to them during that year, especially during the playoffs, right? They got a few really bad bounces by Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh also planned on having more of a presence at their stadium as far as fans were considered. But then there was a recent COVID outbreak that made them have no fans there for a home playoff game, which basically made it a neutral field. And I'm not saying that the Browns didn't fight through their own circumstances to get the success that they did or try to take anything away from it. But maybe our perception in 2020 that we were this close to a conference championship game and this close to winning a Super Bowl was a bit off when you consider like we had a whole fourth quarter against the Chiefs where Pat Mahomes wasn't in there and we could not beat the Kansas City Chiefs with Chad Henne. We were much further away than we thought, but the way that the Browns operated was that they were this close, right? That miscalculation kind of led us to where we are today, because that success in 2020 made the Cleveland Browns fast track a win now plan, and they were pretty stubborn on letting go of that win now plan. The Browns wanted to refine the same offense that they had in 2020, and they were thinking, hey, we're getting back guys for the full season that were hurt for most of the season last year. Odell Beckham would be returning, and he would be useful to this offense. Nick Chubb would be back for a full 17 games after only playing, I think, like 10 games in 2020. So not only are you refining and adding to what you had there, you got Odell, you got Baker Mayfield, you got Nick Chubb, and all you really have to do is add some pieces to the defense. And that was the year the Browns signed Jadeveon Clowney, amongst other pieces on that defense. I mean, the defense did get better than it was in 2020. People kind of forget that like 2021 justified Joe Woods' existence. 2020 was pretty bad, and 2022 will ultimately be so bad that it gets Joe Woods fired. But 2021 was the lone standout year for Joe Woods as a defensive coordinator, and it was probably the year that he had the most talent at the defensive coordinator spot. So the defense was better. The offense was getting some key pieces back healthy for the full season. Things should go straight to the moon, right? Baker Mayfield and Odell Beckham, that should be an all-pro combination. The Browns should be able to combine a great offense with a strong defense, and they should be serious contenders in 2021. That was the thinking. But that's not what happened. Baker Mayfield derailed. Baker Mayfield's injury derailed that season and the Cleveland Browns as an organization in many more ways than just one, right? It led to the final straw in the Baker-Odell drama, right? The injury to Baker Mayfield made him less capable on the field, which led to more of these shocking miss moments that ended up being put into a compilation that ended up being cut into a lowlight reel of Baker Mayfield that Odell Beckham's father posted on the internet. This led to family members going at family members and basically making an already shaky relationship that Baker Mayfield and Odell Beckham shared into a non-existent relationship between the two. The other big thing that does not get talked about enough that happened with that injury is I think during the course of handling that injury, the Browns were exposed to some of the bigger warts in the character of Baker Mayfield from their perspective. Like how he handled that. And like, I know people love to argue about this shit to this day. But in my opinion, how Baker Mayfield handled that injury kind of exposed how he was not ready to lead a franchise at that point of his career. I think he's matured over the last few years because of everything that he's been through in his career. And even then, there are some spurts of immaturity that still show out from Baker Mayfield. But if you go back to 2021, it paints a picture of a guy who just was not ready to lead a franchise, in my personal opinion. I know everybody loves to tell the story of the LOL Browns version of this story, that Baker Mayfield was a perfect little angel and the Browns gave up on him for no reason. But there were plenty of reasons that the Browns gave up on Baker Mayfield. And there were also plenty of reasons on why the Panthers ended up giving up on Baker Mayfield the year after, right? These things weren't just exclusive to Baker Mayfield in Cleveland. They were exclusive to Baker Mayfield himself, and something that Baker Mayfield himself has said that was part of why he failed at those two stops. He was just hostile to medical advisement, unwilling to listen to medical experts about his situation. He was unable to see past his personal situation and make a decision that benefited the team, right? Baker Mayfield was so afraid of somebody trying to take his spot, even though he was the number 1 overall pick, even though he had been the starting quarterback for 4 years, that he just refused to let other people step in for him if he could be in a position to refute. Question from the Browns about whether Baker Mayfield had misled them about the injury. Baker Mayfield's conduct with the media at that time, his social media conduct, how his family was subtweeting about the situation. It all paints a picture of a guy who's not ready to get paid, a guy who's not ready to lead a franchise. And there were already questions about if the guy was talented enough to lead you to that situation in the first place, right? Because Baker Mayfield, while he is a talented quarterback and certainly a starting level quarterback throughout most of his career, he's not proven to be somebody that you can win a championship with. There's no conference championship appearances for Baker Mayfield as of right now. There's no Super Bowl appearances for Baker Mayfield right now. And the version of him that existed in 2021 certainly wasn't at that place. Now, all of this led to the most important domino of that Baker Mayfield situation that nobody talks about to fall. And that domino is that all of this that happened in 2021, how he handles the injury, the lack of leadership that they felt like he showed, the immaturity that they felt like he showed, made the Browns even more hardened in their position that they don't want to pay Baker Mayfield franchise quarterback money, right? And that's what set off this whole thing. If the Browns in 2021 were frustrated with Baker Mayfield, but still ultimately willing to give him his money, Baker wouldn't have had the problems in the offseason that he ended up having. But the Browns, rightfully so, saw these issues and said to themselves, I'm not sure about giving that guy a bunch of money. Now, they did give somebody with a bunch of issues a bunch of money, which kind of dilutes their point here, but that's a whole nother subject. They did not want to pay Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield was obviously aware that the Browns did not want to pay Baker Mayfield because he was in the last year of his rookie deal with no extension on the horizon, which is not a place that former first-round picks are usually in that think that they should get an extension. Usually the extension is done well into the offseason. So when you're Baker Mayfield and you're thinking you're going to get an extension, but nobody's calling you about an extension, you already know something's up. And then you're hearing that the Browns have interest in Deshaun Watson. This is the pressure cooker that led to everything that cascaded in that offseason. Because of that money pressure cooker, that led to the infamous adult in the room leak. That quote leaked because the contract wasn't imminent, right? I personally believe it was Baker's side that leaked that. But, you know, there's different theories on who leaked that. I don't know the definitive answer but that pressure cooker leads to that adult in the room leak, which the fallout of only confirmed the suspicions that the Browns had about not wanting to pay him. So they looked into this Deshaun Watson situation, and then that got leaked, and then that led to Baker Mayfield requesting a trade, which led to Deshaun Watson $230 million guaranteed. In essence, the Browns dropped Baker Mayfield and replaced him with Deshaun Watson, who was a quarterback with an impeccable reputation at the time. But what the Browns thought they were doing, in all seriousness, right? They thought they were doing what Disney and Marvel did with Iron Man. If y'all remember, the first Iron Man movie has, as Colonel Rhodes or War Machine, it has Terrence Howard in it. Now, if y'all don't know nothing about Terrence Howard, which I expect most of my audience does know about Terrence Howard, Terrence Howard, great actor, little unstable, right? You know, he got a little crazy in him, maybe a lot of crazy in him, right? But, you know, Terrence Howard is an interesting personality. And what the Browns thought they were doing was what Disney and Marvel thought they were doing, right? We're going to replace Terrence Howard, who's good, with Don Cheadle, who's good and reliable. That's not what ended up happening. This would be like what the Browns ended up doing was if they replaced Terrence Howard in Iron Man with Jonathan Majors. That's basically what I could describe the Browns did. It was like, oh yeah, we think Jonathan Majors is a better actor than Terrence Howard, and you end up with a different brand of problematic, but a more significant brand of problematic than the one you replaced, because Terrence Howard is a little crazy. Jonathan Major, he got a lot more major stuff going on with his name. If we go back to the plan in 2022 was simple, right? Basically, throw Baker Mayfield out the 2021 plan, replace him with Deshaun Watson, and then that's the plan for 2022. That plan failed. 1, Watson got suspended 11 games. 2, the Browns severely underestimated the strain that him not playing 700 days was gonna have on his game. And quite frankly, you can make the argument that it never recovered from those 700 days off. Deshaun played. He did not look good when he played. He looked really rusty. And any plan to replicate the 2020 season, but with Deshaun Watson and a better defense, fell through. Also, the defense was absolutely dog shit in 2022 as well, which made things worse. So minor setback, but Deshaun looks rusty. We can hire a new defensive coordinator. He's going to get the whole offseason, and then boom, we're back on that 2021 plan of, refining the offense and getting a better defense. And look, the defense was great in 2023. Jim Schwartz takes the job and proves to be much more competent than not Baker Mayfield. But much more confident than Joe Woods was in 2023. But something interesting and probably much worse for Deshaun Watson ends up happening in that season. Because yes, the plan in 2023 ultimately fails, but the Browns did succeed, which in retrospect was probably much worse for Deshaun Watson and led to the disaster that 2024 was. See, early in 2023, that plan that I just described, basically the same plan the Browns been running since 2021, but add this quarterback in Deshaun Watson into the conversation, that plan was working. Deshaun Watson was really good in the opener versus Cincinnati, and he had his best game as a Cleveland Brown versus the Tennessee Titans. The Browns were 2-1. They were looking really good. The defense was improved. Deshaun had his closest game to what he used to look like in 2020 against the Titans. But then in that same Titans game, Deshaun Watson got injured. This led to a very strange 4-week stretch for Deshaun Watson that basically made all the strides that he made those first 3 weeks of the season go away, right? People forgot about it. The reason that is because the 4 weeks that followed after the injury were so bizarre that nobody really remembers the first 3 weeks of that 2020 season. See, Watson had maintained that he was going to be healthy up until like the Saturday before a Sunday game versus the Baltimore Ravens. And that meant that DTR got thrown out there into the Wolves, right? And it was a disaster of a performance for Dorian Thompson-Robinson and the Cleveland Browns. And then he tried to come back early against the Colts. And that, again, was a disastrous performance. But in between this weird stretch, you're seeing the Browns be able to win games with Phillip Walker, PJ Walker, for those who speak GOAT. So the Browns are winning in the interim. Nobody's really blown away by the quarterback play of PJ Walker, so everybody's pretty excited to hear that Watson will be coming back. And as long as Watson comes back before the end of the season, the Browns go on a playoff run. Watson's a huge part of that. There's really no problem here with those 4 weeks, right? And everything goes to plan. Watson comes back versus Arizona, plays really well, and then has the highlight of his career as a Cleveland Brown against the Baltimore Ravens, where he has this double-digit comeback in the fourth quarter on the road at M&T Bank Stadium. It's this kind of stuff that we've been praying for a quarterback to do in Cleveland, and this kind of stuff that justified the trade for Deshaun Watson was having a guy be able to do that kind of stuff at the quarterback position. It was the first time we really, as a city, started to buy in fully, whether you were on the Baker side or not, to Deshaun Watson as the franchise quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. It was a huge momentum swing for him, something that could have changed his run in Cleveland in a way that we won't really know, because Deshaun Watson in that same game injured his shoulder, and that injury meant that he missed the rest of the season. Now, again, if the Browns kind of just peter out after that point, not win a ton, the season being what it is, but we have that high point in Baltimore to look at, I think we could have gone into the 2024 season with some optimism and some excitement about Deshaun Watson, or at least more so than what actually happened, because in reality, that's not what happened. What happened is that Joe Flacco came in and arguably outplayed Deshaun Watson while he was here, which added fuel to the fire on all the negativity around Deshaun Watson. It was like everything good that happened in 2023, all the positive steps that the Browns took with Deshaun Watson in 2023 kind of got overshadowed by weird stuff that happened with him, right? Whether it be the shoulder injury or Joe Flacco stepping in and playing really well. And that kind of casted a darker cloud on Deshaun than maybe people were hoping for within the Browns organization, because what this made the Browns do was they forced them to have to commit to Deshaun Watson, right? And what that looked like was firing Alex Van Pelt, who, as far as fans knew, was successful in 2020 and was successful in 2023. So that move, whether you agree with it or not, did put more scrutiny on Deshaun Watson because it was seen as a move to make Deshaun Watson happy and bring in something that's more familiar with what he likes to do. This led into the pressure cooker of 2024 that completely destroyed Deshaun Watson. The Browns' plan was clear. Deshaun Watson's going to be healthy. We're going to build this offense around him. We have a top 5 defense. If he can just be what he was in that Baltimore game, we're a playoff team. That's what the Browns were hoping. But there were very clear signs early in the offseason during that year that wasn't going to happen. He seemed physically unwell throughout the entire 2024 offseason, especially once that part of the offseason became a lot more visible to fans, right? Training camp was really when people started to notice that there wasn't much buy-in from the people in this offense about this offense. And then the season started, his arm didn't have the same amount of zip on it. People started to notice. He just looked very physically unwell in 2024. I feel like the pressure of everything that was hitting him physically and the fact that he wasn't 100% physically was there. But really what I think affected him the most was the mental pressure he was under, because everything good he did in 2023 was wiped away in the public eye because of what Joe Flacco did and what the Browns went on to achieve after him. That also put high expectations on this football team. The Browns were 11-6 with a bunch of different quarterbacks playing in 2023. The expectation was, with Watson healthy, that the Browns would at worst be able to replicate that win-loss total and be able to succeed beyond that, right? Take the next step. So you have that kind of win-now pressure on the back of Deshaun Watson. You also have all of the other pressure that was on him, because by 2024, people wanted the contract to be justified. They wanted the trade to be justified. The media scrutiny that the Browns took for taking on and trading for a player who was accused of sexual assault and sexual harassment by so many people when they traded for him, people wanted that to be justified. They wanted everything to be justified with this 2025 season. All the noise, all the criticism, all the expectations. Joe Flacco was able to do this. The Browns have a new offensive coordinator just here for you. All of that had to be justified in 2024, and Deshaun Watson's body and his mind were completely crumbled by that point. And that was on full display week 1 versus Dallas, and quite honestly, for at least 6 of his 7 starts in 2024. He had a decent game against the Raiders, but Raiders are pretty bad. Every other game that he played in just demonstrated that his arm talent wasn't what it was, that something was severely affecting his ability to throw the football, and he had zero confidence in his ability to do anything as a quarterback. This led to the Browns basically saying Deshaun Watson was a swing and a miss, which is the catalyst to where the Browns are today. So if you've ever asked yourself, how did the Browns get to where they are today? That, in my opinion, is exactly how the Browns got there. They were a little bit too good, a little bit too early, which sped up their timeline just a little bit and made them just a little bit more ambitious than maybe they had the right to be, which sped up some timelines, which put the Browns in difficult spots when it came to Baker Mayfield. And Baker Mayfield himself put himself in a difficult spot with the Cleveland Browns, which led to Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson leads to where we are today. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.